Good morning, students. Here we start with the gross anatomy of the abdomen. So our first lecture, the gross anatomy of the regions of abdomen and the gross anatomy of umbilicus. So first we start with the gross anatomy of the different regions of the abdomen. Now this is very important. We need to understand the level, the planes for topographic understanding of the underlying organs. The entire abdomen is generalized, or it is divided into 9 different regions, 9 different quadrants, which you should remember it as a doctor. Now here, to understand, very simple, we first draw a median line and then we draw the xiphisternum. This is the xiphisternal joint over here. Then on either side, we draw the costal margin. This is the costal margin. Then on either side, the lateral abdominal wall, and lower down here we draw the iliac crest. We show the iliac crest on both the sides. So therefore now the entire abdomen, this is our anterior abdominal wall, or rather this is our abdominal cavity, costal margins, xiphisternum, the midline, linea alba it is called, midline. Later on we'll understand that. These are the two lateral abdominal wall and the iliac crest. Now the entire region of abdomen is divided by 2 horizontal lines and 2 vertical lines. First we consider the horizontal lines. Now these horizontal lines are many times asked in MCQs or one-word question answer. The first horizontal line, it is called transpyloric plane of Edison. Transpyloric plane of Edison, it will pass across the level of body of L1 vertebra. So therefore, it will cross across the body of L1 vertebra posteriorly, and anteriorly it will cross across the level of 9th costal cartilage. And this transpyloric plane, we will write the levels over here. Try and understand this transpyloric plane is many times asked in one-mark question answer for all these points. Third point, this transpyloric plane will pass midway between suprasternal notch, we know where is our suprasternal notch, and symphysis pubis. So midway between, somewhere over here, suprasternal notch and symphysis pubis, exactly midway the transpyloric plane is located. And the fourth point is, once again the transpyloric plane will pass midway between xiphisternal joint and umbilicus. So therefore, if we draw the level of umbilicus over here, then the transpyloric plane will be midway between xiphisternal joint and umbilicus. And if we draw the transpyloric plane, this will represent the transpyloric plane. So therefore, it will be midway between xiphisternal joint and the umbilicus, and we draw the umbilicus slightly at a upper level over here. And therefore, now this will also pass across the body of L1. So here we shall draw the L1 vertebrae. So we mark this as L1. And it will also pass anteriorly across the 9th costal cartilage. So therefore, we are going to mark this also as the 9th costal cartilage. Here also the 9th costal cartilage. It is passing across the 9th costal cartilage anteriorly. So this is a transverse plane, horizontal plane, passing across 9th costal cartilage anteriorly, both the sides, and posteriorly across the L1, at the level of L1 vertebrae. These levels you have to remember, they are very much asked in one-mark question answer. And also it lies midway between xiphisternal joint and umbilicus, and also it lies midway between suprasternal joint and suprasternal notch and pubic symphysis. Now, what are the structures which are found at transpyloric plane? Those few structures also you have to remember, it is many times asked in MCQs or one-mark question answer. Certain structures are found at this level. At this level, you will be having pylorus of the stomach, then the origin of superior mesenteric artery, the lower end of spinal cord, the fundus of the gallbladder, and the hyla of both the kidneys. These are the structures which are found at this level. Similarly now, we come across to another plane, the lower horizontal plane. The lower horizontal plane is called transtubercular plane. And that transtubercular plane will pass across the tubercles of iliac crest. So if I connect the two tubercles of iliac crest, then this will be the transtubercular plane, passing across the two tubercles of iliac crest. But more important is the vertebral level. The vertebral level where it passes through will always be the L5 vertebra. So here I am going to write down L5. This is the vertebral level where the transpyloric plane. So here I am going to write down not transpyloric but transtubercular plane, the lower horizontal plane, and of course this is the transpyloric plane, the upper horizontal plane. Transpyloric plane at L1 level, transtubercular plane at L5 level. Now, in the books, textbooks, they have mentioned two more planes which you need to remember. They are also asked in MCQs or 1 mark questions. So the two planes are, along with the upper horizontal plane, some scientists, they refer to another horizontal plane instead of transpyloric plane. And that horizontal plane, if they take into consideration, is it will pass in such a way that it will cross L3 vertebrae. So it will be crossing somewhere here the L3 vertebrae, and that plane is called subcostal plane. So that subcostal plane now, here if I draw, this will be the subcostal plane. And remember, it will pass through the upper part of the body of L3 vertebra, upper part of the body of L3 vertebra, and it will cross the costal margin. Which costal margin? The 10th costal margin, the 10th rib costal margin. So here you can write it as 10th rib costal margin. Here also the 10th rib costal margin. And this plane which I have drawn, this, according to some books, they have mentioned this plane, they have referred this plane as the subcostal plane. So here this is also very important, the subcostal plane, passing across the upper border of L3 vertebra and cutting across or passing across anteriorly across the costal cartilages of the 10th rib, the maximum convexity of the costal cartilages of the 10th rib. And then coming down at this level, there is one more plane which you need to understand, that is supracristal plane. The supracristal plane is again a horizontal plane which will pass across the highest points of, it will connect on both the sides, highest point of iliac crest. So if you cut this plane or if you draw this plane cutting across the highest point of iliac crest, it will pass across the highest point of iliac crest of both the sides. Then posteriorly it will pass across L4 vertebra. So here this will be L4 vertebra, L4 vertebral level. Name of this plane, it will be supracristal plane, the supracristal plane. So therefore, as of we have understood 4 horizontal planes, but out of these 4 horizontal planes, the planes which are taken into consideration for dividing the entire abdomen into 9 different regions, the 2 horizontal planes, they are the transpyloric plane and the transtubercular plane, not subcostal but transtubercular plane. So transpyloric plane L1 level and transtubercular plane L5 level. These 2 planes we consider. Now the 2 vertical lines. When you draw the 2 vertical planes, the 2 vertical planes will always pass across the mid-inguinal region, mid-inguinal point. What is mid-inguinal point? Mid-inguinal point is the midpoint between anterior superior iliac spine and pubic symphysis. So the midpoint between anterior superior iliac spine and pubic symphysis is called mid-inguinal point. When you draw that line vertically extending upwards, it will cross above mid-clavicular point. So therefore, the vertical line connecting mid-inguinal point with mid-clavicular point, these 2 vertical lines we need to draw. So therefore here, when we draw these 2 vertical lines, it will be like this. So these are the 2 vertical lines, and here also we shall draw the 2 vertical lines. So these 2 vertical planes or vertical lines, they are drawn in such a way that they will cross mid-inguinal point lower down, and upwards they will cross the mid-clavicular point. So therefore now, with the help of two horizontal and two vertical planes, we divide the entire abdomen into 9 different regions. And how do we understand these 9 different regions which you have to memorize? We have the upper zone, the middle zone, lower zone. Upper zone is above the upper horizontal plane, and lower zone is below the lower horizontal plane, and middle zone is between the upper and lower horizontal plane. Now each zone will contain 1, 2, 3 quadrants, 1, 2, 3 quadrants, 1, 2, 3 quadrants. So we give the name now. We start with upper zone, this quadrant over here. Here I am going to write the name, so I will use red color, pink color. The upper quadrant here, we give the name as epigastric region. This is the epigastric region, epigastric quadrant. On right and left, here we give the name as, this is the right hypochondrium. This one will be the left hypochondrium. The right hypochondrium region, left hypochondrium region, and epigastrium or epigastric region. Middle zone will contain this much. It is called the umbilical zone. So the epigastric region, umbilical. Then on either side of umbilical, these two zones will be known as here the right lumbar, and over here the left lumbar quadrant. Now below the umbilical zone, below the umbilical region, this zone over here is called hypogastric region. So this much zone is called hypogastric region. So in the median plane, epigastric region, umbilical and hypogastric region. Now on either side of hypogastric region, here these two zones over here, this is the right iliac zone or right iliac region, and over here this is the left iliac region or quadrant. So therefore, altogether 9 different quadrants we have made. Names of all the quadrants you need to remember. This is how we divide the entire abdomen into the 9 different quadrants, 9 different regions. Please memorize these names. Now, we come to another important topic, that is umbilicus. Now in the umbilicus, when we consider the umbilicus, this is the umbilicus, it mainly consists of, what does it consist of? It consists of a fibrous tissue which serves as the attachment of umbilical cord during the fetal stage. So here this umbilicus is a mass of fibrous tissue which will serve as the fetal end of attachment of umbilical cord. We know that, that is the pure definition. Now why umbilicus is important? Why we have to study the umbilicus? That is because first we visit intraembryonic life, intrauterine life. Now in that, the entire umbilicus consists of umbilical cord. Of course we know that connecting the placenta with that of the umbilical region of the fetus, and in that portion we have 2 important structures. For example, please come on this side here. So here we are going to draw the sagittal section which we have drawn in embryology. Very simple, this is a basic structure. Now over here, this is the fetal side, this is the portion of the umbilicus, the umbilical cord, and this is the maternal side. So just a sagittal section, and what we need to show will be this umbilicus in the fetal stage. It will contain 2 important structures, that will be the vitello-intestinal duct and allantoenteric diverticulum, which is also called allantoic diverticulum, which we have discussed during the developmental stages also, in embryology also. But here we need to mention and we need to draw one particular diagram for that, and that diagram will be, for example, here we are going to draw the foregut. Now we draw the midgut and the hindgut. Foregut, midgut, hindgut. Now we draw it in the form of a tubular structure. So this is the tubular structure of foregut, midgut and hindgut. And then we are going to show vitellointestinal duct. So in order to show this vitellointestinal duct, we show this vitellointestinal duct as another tubular structure. This is the vitellointestinal duct, and it will connect with the umbilical vesicle. So this is the umbilical vesicle which is present within the umbilical cord. And this structure over here, if you consider to draw it in the form of a tube, and it will be known as, this structure will be known as vitellointestinal duct. So the vitellointestinal duct will connect midgut, this is the midgut, with that of umbilical vesicle. This is vitellointestinal duct. And therefore, this vitellointestinal duct, here I will mention this as vitellointestinal duct, connecting the midgut with that of the umbilical vesicle. Surrounding this vitellointestinal duct will be the coelom. Now this is known as umbilical coelom because it is at the present of the umbilicus, it is present around the umbilicus. So here there will be coelom which will be known as umbilical coelom. So this portion will be known as the coelom, umbilical coelom. And this umbilical coelom, yellow color I have drawn, it will serve as a source of communication between extraembryonic coelom with intraembryonic coelom. That also we have discussed in embryology, but at this stage we need to understand this. Therefore, after some time, the vitellointestinal duct in 98% of cases will disappear, will obliterate after some time. Similarly, the umbilical coelom also will obliterate after some time. But what does this umbilical coelom contain? Why we have mentioned umbilical coelom at this point? We have mentioned umbilical coelom here to understand this loop. And this loop which we have drawn, this is the midgut loop. And remember, we have discussed this extensively during the development of gastrointestinal tract in our embryology section. So this midgut loop will serve as physiological umbilical hernia till 10 weeks of intrauterine life. Up till 10 weeks of intrauterine life, this midgut loop will serve as physiological umbilical hernia and will be lying outside the abdominal cavity of the fetus, surrounded by umbilical coelom. Then what will happen? As we have understood that in 98% of cases the vitellointestinal duct disappears, at the same time umbilical coelom will also disappear. Umbilical coelom, we know that it connects extraembryonic coelom with intraembryonic coelom, that also obliterates. And as it obliterates, after 10th week or just at the starting of 10th week and onwards, till from 10th week till 11th week, 12th week, the midgut loop will then pass back into the abdominal cavity of the fetus. So that is called the physiological umbilical hernia, which will reduce back inside the umbilical cavity. So that is called reduction of the physiological umbilical hernia. The midgut loop will again go back in the abdominal cavity. That will be after 10th week. So that is one important structure, vitellointestinal duct, midgut loop. That is one structure now. Midgut loop is called physiological umbilical hernia, we know that. Now second important structure we have to draw over here, and that important structure will be, this is the hindgut. Now this portion, once again if I redraw, this is the hindgut. And of course we know that this is the foregut. This hindgut will have allantoenteric diverticulum, or it is called allantoic diverticulum. This diverticulum is attaching the hindgut with the fetal end of umbilical cord. So simply it is present, where it is present, extending from the hindgut, endodermal cloaca. That hindgut is called endodermal cloaca now, and it will extend in the umbilical cord, because this extension will be the umbilical cord. The entire covering will be umbilical cord, inside which all these structures are there. So it will extend in the umbilical cord, and this is known as, now here if I just cover this, so this portion will be known as the allantoic diverticulum. Later on what will happen? This allantoic diverticulum will also obliterate, and it will be replaced by a mass of fibrous cord which will be known as urachus. It will be replaced by urachus. So after some stage it will be replaced by urachus, a mass of fibrous tissue, and this urachus after intrauterine life will be replaced by median umbilical ligament. So at birth there will be presence of median umbilical ligament. The urachus will be replaced by median umbilical ligament after intrauterine. Ligament will be present in the children and adults, and this median umbilical ligament will be seen connecting the apex of urinary bladder, which will develop from this endodermal cloaca only. So it will be connecting the apex of urinary bladder with umbilicus. So therefore, after birth, the entire allentoic diverticulum, that is the urachus, will be replaced by median umbilical ligament connecting apex of urinary bladder with umbilicus. So that is why we have mentioned these two special important points regarding the gross anatomy of umbilicus. The first point was vitellointestinal duct with the midgut loop. Second important point was regarding this allentoic diverticulum, because they are the two important structures related to the gross anatomy of umbilicus. But of course, they are the structures in intrauterine life, embryonic part. But we need to understand at this level also. Now we come to the real importance of umbilicus, as it is mentioned in several textbooks, the importance of umbilicus, or it is mentioned in different textbooks as applied anatomy of umbilicus. Very important. Or clinical significance of umbilicus. Now the real importance or applied anatomy of umbilicus we consider in different points. Here we consider the first point as congenital anomalies of umbilicus. Very interesting, because several children are born at the time of their birth with these congenital anomalies. Number one, the first congenital anomaly will be, here I write it as different arrows. This is the vitellointestinal duct. Please try and understand. Now this vitellointestinal duct, if it has to disappear. Remember, I told you 98% of cases it will disappear. In some portion, minor amount of cases, sometimes the proximal portion of vitellointestinal duct, where my finger is there, this is proximal, this is distal. Normally entire has to disappear, the entire vitellointestinal duct, but in some cases the proximal part of vitellointestinal duct at the where it is attached to midgut will persist, and those cases are known as Meckel's diverticulum. Now these are 1 mark question answers, 1 mark question answers, all of them. Try and understand. So persistence of proximal part of vitellointestinal duct during birth will develop into Meckel's diverticulum, proximal part. Second congenital anomaly of umbilicus. Consider the same vitellointestinal duct. Instead of proximal part now, if there is persistence of entire vitellointestinal duct, the entire vitellointestinal duct remains patent at the time of birth, what will happen? If it remains patent at the time of birth, it is called the fecal fistula. It is called the fecal fistula. So therefore, if I want to show this with a line diagram, please come on this side. Now this is the anterior abdominal wall. I am showing this with a line diagram, and this is the umbilical opening. Now here, there will be persistence of the entire vitellointestinal duct in this manner. Then all the fecal contents will pass outside. This is the abdominal cavity of the fetus, and this is the exterior part. This is the umbilical opening. This is the persistence of vitellointestinal duct. Then this condition is called fecal fistula, which we have written. Second congenital anomaly. Third congenital anomaly. Instead of entire vitellointestinal duct which remains patent, only middle portion of the vitellointestinal duct will remain. Only the middle portion will remain. Then what will happen? If only the middle portion of vitellointestinal duct will remain, here once again I will draw the umbilicus, and if only the median portion of vitellointestinal duct remains, then it is converted into a fibrous tissue or fibrous mass, which will be known as enterocystoma. So the third congenital anomaly, here I will write this as enterocystoma. Enterocystoma. What will happen? This enterocystoma later on will cause bulging outside the umbilicus. So it may cause bulging outside the umbilicus. This is the third congenital anomaly, when only the middle portion of vitellointestinal duct will persist, will remain. Then it will be converted into enterocystoma. It is called enterocystoma. All these are asked as 1 mark question answer, remember, or MCQs. Now the fourth congenital anomaly. Fourth will be, instead of the proximal part or the entire vitellointestinal duct or the middle part. Now the distal segment of vitellointestinal duct. Distal segment is towards the umbilical portion. If the distal segment of vitellointestinal duct will persist, those cases what will happen? There will be continuous mucus discharge at that distal point. So at distal point, here if I show, if at this distal level there is persistence of the distal end of vitellointestinal duct, there will be continuous mucus discharge at this level, in such a way that this mucus discharge, because of the pressure it is creating in the abdomen, it will evaginate outside the umbilicus. As it goes on evaginating outside the umbilicus, it will develop into a reddish tumor. And those cases are known as the raspberry red tumor. So this one will be the fourth congenital anomaly. When distal part of vitellointestinal duct will persist, then it will cause mucus secretion at the level of umbilicus, which will evaginate outside and develop into a small tumor, reddish color, which is called raspberry red tumor. This is the fourth congenital anomaly. Remember, when distal end of vitellointestinal duct will remain, when it will persist. Now we come to fifth anomaly. As I told you, if we see this diagram over here, midgut loop, which is forming physiological umbilical hernia, if the entire midgut loop physiological umbilical hernia will persist here, instead of reducing back in the abdominal cavity, if it remains outside at the time of birth of the child, then we can see a mass which is hanging outside, a mass or a swelling which is present outside the umbilical cavity of the fetus, outside the umbilicus. And therefore, that condition will be known as exomphalos. So that condition will be known as, here I will write down, exomphalos. Please note down. This is also asked in MCQ one mark question. What is exomphalos? They may ask. Exomphalos is when the physiological umbilical hernia is not reduced. So it will, the entire midgut loop will be present in the form of a mass or a swelling outside the umbilical cavity of the fetus. That condition is called exomphalos. And number 6, the last congenital anomaly, number 6th point. If there is persistence of allantoic diverticulum, as it is in the intrauterine life, it remains persist, or if it is persisting, or if it is remaining patent, the entire patent allantoic diverticulum at the time of birth is known as urinary fistula. It will be known as the urinary fistula. If the entire allantoic diverticulum will persist or will remain patent at the time of birth. And in those cases only, instead of entire allantoic diverticulum remaining patent, only a small portion in the middle part remains patent. Only a small portion in the middle part of the allantoic diverticulum, if it remains patent, it will be known as urachal cyst. Please note down, it will be known as urachal cyst. So what is urachal cyst? Small middle portion of allantoic diverticulum, when it remains patent at the time of birth, it will be converted into urachal cyst. So here these are the 6 different points which we have finished under the heading of congenital anomalies of the umbilicus. Now, as this is the first point, remember this is the first point of applied anatomy or clinical importance of umbilicus, gross anatomy of umbilicus. Why umbilicus is important from gross anatomical point of view? This is the first point. Congenital anomalies in which we have discussed 6 different points. Now the second point. We come to the second point. Please come over here. Over here, we consider the second point. So in the second point, we write down caput medusae. Caput medusae. This is frequently asked 1 mark question answer. What is caput medusae? Now here, the umbilicus, if you draw the umbilicus, if this is the umbilicus, there is a branch of portal vein coming from above. A branch of portal vein, supposing if I draw this as portal vein, a branch of portal vein and this branch of portal vein is called para-umbilical vein. So this branch of portal vein, which is called para-umbilical vein, will anastomose with so many tributaries of systemic veins which are present around the umbilicus. What are those tributaries of systemic veins present around the umbilicus? For example, these are the tributaries: superior epigastric, lateral thoracic veins, then inferior epigastric on both the sides. I'm just discussing on both the sides. Then superficial epigastric, and then from the sides the posterior intercostal and the lumbar veins. All these veins which I have drawn, they are systemic veins, and they are present surrounding the umbilicus. For example, superior epigastric, lateral thoracic veins, the inferior epigastric, the superficial epigastric, the posterior intercostal and the lumbar veins. They are systemic veins. Remember, all these veins, they are the systemic veins. This is a portal vein, para-umbilical vein, this systemic vein, anastomosis. Now what will happen? During portal hypertension, all these systemic veins are distended, and they are distended in such a way that they will resemble the spokes of a wheel. They resemble the spokes of wheel surrounding the umbilicus like this. And as they resemble when they are distended, the systemic veins, when they are distended during portal hypertension, they resemble spokes of a wheel surrounding the umbilicus. And this particular picture, it is known as caput medusae. It is called caput medusae. Please try and remember and understand this. 1 mark question answer. So this is the second important point of umbilicus. Now third important point of umbilicus. Here we give it as watershed line. What is watershed line? Very simple to understand, very interesting. In this watershed line, the entire umbilicus, if you draw a horizontal line, if I draw a horizontal line passing across the umbilicus, remember this is the umbilicus. Now here, this is the umbilicus, and we are drawing a horizontal line across the umbilicus. The lymphatic drainage above this horizontal line will drain all the subcutaneous lymphatics above this horizontal line. They will drain into axillary group of lymph nodes. The lymphatic drainage, subcutaneous lymphatic drainage above the level of the horizontal line passing through umbilicus will drain into axillary group of lymph nodes, and whatever subcutaneous lymphatics are present below this horizontal line, they will drain into inguinal group of lymph nodes, the inguinal group of lymph nodes. So therefore, this horizontal line passing across umbilicus, it will serve as a watershed line. The entire umbilicus will serve as a watershed line in which the lymphatic drainage above the level of umbilicus will drain into axillary group of lymph nodes, and the lymphatic drainage below the level of umbilicus will drain into inguinal group of lymph nodes. Why this is important? Because any malignancy occurring at the level of umbilicus, therefore it will have maximum chance of metastatic spread. Any malignancy occurring at the level of umbilicus will have maximum chance of metastatic spread. It can spread from the umbilical level either into the axillary group of lymph nodes above, or it can spread below the umbilicus into the inguinal group of lymph nodes below. That is why this umbilicus, which functions as the watershed line, is very important. That is point number 3. Now point number 4. This is very important. This umbilicus now will serve as the center where referred pains are exhibited. So therefore, this umbilicus will serve as the point of referred pain. First, there is localized pain. Remember, either there will be localized pain at the umbilicus, or there may be referred pain. What is this referred pain? Localized pain at the level of umbilicus means the umbilicus itself is having certain disease which is having the pain at that particular region, at that particular point. It is called localized pain. Referred pain is very important. In the referred pain, the umbilicus, there will be pain felt at the umbilicus because of certain diseases in the gonads, testes or ovaries. So in the gonads, testes or ovaries, if there are any disease or any cancerous growth, the pain will be referred to the umbilicus. So therefore, This is the referred pain when there is any disease affecting the gonads, testes or ovaries. It may be referred to the umbilicus, or any kind of pain originating from appendix. It is called inflammation of appendix, which is called appendicitis. If there is any pain in the appendix, even that will be referred to the umbilicus. And because all these three structures will have the same segmental level of innervation, the same segmental level of innervation, T10 segment, the T10 spinal segments will be present at the level of umbilicus. Same way it is draining the, or it is having a sensory drainage on the level of gonads and the appendix. So the T10 segments, because of the same segmental innervation of these three structures, the pain which will be experienced in these gonads, male and female gonads, or in appendix will be experienced at the level of the umbilicus. That pain will be felt at the level of umbilicus. This is called referred pain. And therefore, if there is any mass which is present below the umbilicus that needs to be referred, that needs to be sorted out, that needs to be diagnosed in order to rule out any disease of the gonads, male and female gonads, if whether there is any malignancy from testes or ovaries which has been metastasized till the level of umbilicus. So for that purpose, any mass which is felt below the level of umbilicus needs to be diagnosed properly. So this is the last point of applied anatomy, applied significance of the umbilicus, or clinical importance of umbilicus, that is called the referred pain. With this we finish the entire gross anatomy of the umbilicus. Thank you very much.